Patrick Mahomes isn't on the main slate, so which quarterback should be in your cash game lineups this week? And the Dolphins are on the bye. They can't lose, but who should you take advantage of this week? We'll tell you which matchups to exploit on this episode of the Footballguys Daily Fantasy Power Grid, presented by DraftKings. John, Vegas gives us lots of clues about which games to target for DFS. What do the Vegas lines look like this week?
Vegas isn't giving us a lot of clues this week. It's an interesting week. As you led with, Miami's not playing, so there's nobody to blow out. So, well, I mean, maybe the Jets would disagree. At the top of our list, Philadelphia giving the Jets 2 touchdowns. Philadelphia's got a 29-point implied team total this week. Problem with Philadelphia is they've turned a little bit towards the Patriots in the sense that they kind of spread the ball out. You got 2 running backs, you got quite a few receivers there. It's tough to know where those fantasy points are going to come from. And they've got the highest implied team total on the entire main slate on DraftKings this week. Who's got the other one? The New England Patriots.
Of course.
15-point favorites over the Redskins. And, of course, we don't know where to go there. There's certainly plenty of fantasy goodness to be had on those teams, but when we start talking about putting together DFS rosters, they could go any which way, especially with both of those teams. If you are playing on fantasy draft, though, the Kansas City Chiefs do have the highest implied team total on the entire slate. They're 11-point favorites over the Indianapolis Colts. And they are slated to score 34 points. So certainly that's something you could be looking at. Well, maybe we'll touch on that throughout the show. Other guys, other teams we might be looking at, the Texans actually have a 27-point implied team total this week. There are a couple players there I have my eye on. They're 5-point favorites over the Atlanta Falcons, who play a little bit differently on the road, as I'm sure you can attest, Austin. And then maybe I'll close out by mentioning the Chargers AFC West against the Denver Broncos. They're touchdown favorites at home with Melvin Gordon back in the mix. And so how do we address that backfield? We'll talk about in just about 10 to 15 minutes. So I think that's kind of the overview this week. It's an interesting week because we don't have the types of team totals that we've seen throughout the first month of the year. And there are some different ways to go this week in terms of making those lineups in both cash and GPP.
That's a good breakdown. We're going to go to quarterbacks. Ryan, welcome back from your assignment last week. Good to have you back. We'll kick it to you for quarterbacks first. Some of the injuries we have here. Mitchell Trubisky looks like he's not going to go. Case Keenum, maybe not. It doesn't really matter. And then Josh Allen is in the concussion protocol, and he may or may not go this week. Ryan, who do you like?
Yeah, thanks for holding it down while I was gone. The show was as good as ever, which I'm not sure is a great thing for me. But I'm happy to be back, and I hope everybody else is happy to have me. Not just
Definitely.
You guys, but those who actually listen. They're more important. So getting back to it here at quarterback, we've often done the Patrick Mahomes and move on thing. We can't this week, so. Got to look elsewhere. Maybe got to
if you play on fantasy draft, you could just play Patrick Mahomes and move on.
You could just go
in
fantasy draft. Yeah, in any format and just put Patrick Mahomes in. Assuming you're not doing that, though, there are a few other guys that I do like. If we're starting at the top of the price range, a la Mahomes, the guy that I like there is Deshaun Watson. John alluded to that game being a potential shootout. First call back, Devin.
In what format are you playing in? Let's talk about this.
Let's do a timeout here. We're 5 weeks in, and this guy's still using what? Can you show it again?
The chicken
what the
scratches.
Hell was this?
A 5-year-old drew it.
It's my brand.
Remember we had these? Remember Austin sent us these like wonderful high-res PNG files or whatever they are. I mean, come on,
Maybe next week.
Yeah, maybe next week.
Maybe
All right,
next
sorry.
week.
Go ahead.
I mean, I to answer your question, Devin, I'd play him in cash. I mean, I think he's safe. I think he's a high floor and a high ceiling. Another player I'm looking at is Carson Wentz. So we mentioned the high team total for the Eagles, and we mentioned they don't know where the ball is going, but all roads tend to lead back to the quarterback when it comes to teams scoring high points. Especially, John, you made a great point that they're turning into the Patriots, right? And Tom Brady has been very good in games where they've been double-digit favorites throughout his career too. So people like to stay away from the quarterback in those games, but in reality, if the team is going to win by 14 or more, they're going to probably score a few touchdowns through the air. Also, I like Lamar Jackson in GPPs. So he goes to Pittsburgh, so it's a beware the short road favorite type situation. But we know the ceiling is always in place. The Steelers' D is suspect despite what they did last week. And Jackson always has the high rushing floor, which he can use to turn into a ceiling if the passing game is working. One other player that I wrote about this week in my Rent a Quarterback article, so it's kind of a season-long play, but also could be a cheaper DFS play, is Andy Dalton. So you have the Arizona volume machine coming to Cincinnati, and you have Dalton at a cheap price. So Cincinnati scores more than half of their points via passing touchdowns, which is the 6th highest in the league. Arizona allows more than half of their points via passing touchdown, 9th highest in the league. Arizona plays the fastest neutral pace. Cincinnati plays the 12th fastest neutral pace. So you've got a volume-based floor, and if Dalton can throw for 3 touchdowns, then you've got the potential 300-yard bonus plus 3 touchdowns, and you're looking at a 4x multiplier on DraftKings.
Devin, you didn't care for that Deshaun Watson pick. Why not?
No, don't play him in cash. He's just not consistent enough. He takes too many sacks. He's had 2 games in which he's thrown 160 yards or less.
Look at who they've played, though. They've played LA Chargers and Jacksonville. They play Atlanta this week.
I get it, but it's not a situation that at 8,300, Atlanta hasn't been that bad. They held your pick, Carson Wentz, to 230 yards and picked him off twice. They held Marcus Mariota last week to 227. Yes, they gave up 3 touchdowns, but they're not that terrible of a team. We'll get to it in a second. I can't fathom playing Watson in cash this week, especially if he's only, $300 cheaper than Lamar Jackson.
400. But yes.
Yeah, 300 on FanDuel, I think. But Lamar Jackson, if you're spending up, is the guy. He, especially on FanDuel, where you don't have the bonus for 300 yards, which he is not likely to hit. But Pittsburgh's secondary is not great. I think we can all agree with that. They give up 340 yards to Tom Brady in week 1, and then 300 yards and 3 touchdowns to Russell Wilson in week 2. They looked better on this past week because they played Andy Dalton, who's trash. But Lamar Jackson will be a guy who I think if you have the salary, I personally don't, but would be the guy to spend up on in cash. Matt Ryan, I do like quite a bit. So Atlanta's not going to be able to run the ball against Houston. Houston has one of the best run defenses in the league. And when they faced Phillip Rivers and Drew Brees, they give up 344 yards on average. So on DraftKings, where you get that 3-point bonus for 300 yards, I think Matt Ryan is almost, I don't want to say a lock, but he's pretty close to a lock to throw 300 yards this week. And then one GPP play, I'm going to go Kyler Murray. So Kyler Murray has struggled this year, but Cincinnati is one of the worst secondaries in football. So they gave up the 2nd most fantasy points last year to quarterbacks. And I know that's last year, but they haven't really faced that great of talent this year. They faced Josh Allen and Mason Rudolph the last 2 weeks. So that's sort of inflating their overall stats this year. So for me in cash on DraftKings, I'm going Matt Ryan. On FanDuel, I'm going Lamar Jackson. And you guys should listen to me because I beat all of our giveaway winners last week.
Yeah, we had our contest against our listeners for getting to that 9,000 subscriber milestone, and Devin was the winner, man. I mean, he redeemed himself for last year's problems and won the contest. We're going to run another contest when we get to 10,000 subscribers. Help us get there, and this contest will have even more people and more prizes.
And I'll win it again, so none of you take my money.
Someone please take Devin's money. John, tell us quarterbacks. Who you like?
Yeah, I don't know where to start with all this. First off, I did my part to let people win Devin's money by finishing in last place. I even rostered Leonard Fournette against his better judgments. He scored 25.5 points, but largely that made up about a third of my points. So I'm just tired, big guy, and Joey Bags. I don't know what happened last week. And then what happened to the other folks who didn't show up? That was disappointing as well. I don't know. You guys have touched on the quarterbacks that I was talking about. I think that Wentz is probably my favorite play for cash games right now. Lamar Jackson at Pittsburgh, that's a big play. I think if you can afford it, that's probably the way to go because of what he brings on the ground. And then, as I think Devin said on fantasy draft, Patrick Mahomes at 14-2 is probably too cheap.
So, quick question: $500 savings between Jackson and Wentz. Are you trying to force the 500?
Isn't it $1,000 difference?
500
on DraftKings, and DraftKings is 1,000. On FanDuel is 500.
Yeah, I think FanDuel's a little bit different, and in fairness, that's probably the site I play the least these days. So I think your point's well taken there. But when I'm talking about DraftKings, it's $1,000 difference and over $2,000 on fantasy draft. For GPPs, I like Watson. Going back to what Ryan said earlier. But I prefer him more on fantasy draft. He's 12-2 over there. I think he's a better play there than he is on DraftKings at 6,700. And then I don't know what do we think? I already know what Devin's going to think. What do we think?
He's flashing the red, black-eyed Joe.
Oakland's defense, 27th DVOA against the pass, and they've been pretty tough up front against the run. What do we think about Chase Daniel as a punt option, pairing him up with Allen Robinson? I'm giving you one of my stacks already, but what do we think about GPPs going that route? I think A-Rob's too cheap, and I think that Chase Daniel could connect with him either in garbage time or just through sheer outclassing wide receiver defensive back matchup. That's $10,000 on DraftKings, leaving you quite a bit of money to go elsewhere.
Devin hates it.
Hate it? Devin hates it.
They're in London. Does that impact it at all? There's a London game.
I don't hate it. I just don't. I don't know if the upside's there. So Daniel is playing. I mean, over the last 4 games that he's played, he's more of a game manager than anything. I just worry a little bit about the upside, and you could get a guy like Teddy Bridgewater for 52, or even Mason Rudolph for 51. I might be tempted to go there, but I don't know if I could go Chase. The matchup's good. I get it, but I think there's a high probability that you're looking at 250 yards, 27 of 32 for 255 yards and 2 touchdowns. That meets the value threshold, but does it do enough for GPPs? I don't know.
Yeah.
If you're looking at a cost per dollar basis, if your top end players that you can force in pay off, then yeah, it could work.
Sure.
But
yeah.
I don't like enough at the top this week, I guess is my point.
Even at the running back position where we're about to go, right?
So
yeah.
And that's where we're headed next. Post in the YouTube comments which of these QB picks you like or dislike. Let's talk about running backs, fellas. We've got James Conner, didn't practice Thursday, looking really iffy for this game on Sunday. We've got Jamal Williams, doubtful, did not practice Thursday. He's in the concussion protocol. Those are the running backs I have my eye on injury-wise. John, let's go to you first for running backs. You brought it up. Christian McCaffrey is the lock of the week.
He's pretty darn close. I mean, the guy's touching the ball about 62 times a game. I don't care what he costs at this point. He's about as close to a lock as you can get with the volume that he's getting in that offense. And he's going up against Jacksonville, who doesn't really scare me. 8,700, 17,000 over at fantasy draft. If you're paying up this week, that's the way to go. Outside of him, Devin, are you gonna give us this for the Leonard Fournette pick this week?
Yes.
And every week, I guess.
Even after last week.
Devin didn't watch the game.
Yeah. Look, Leonard Fournette is a cash game play this week. It's 6,400 against Carolina. It's the right play. You have to look at what Carolina's done against the run. I think they're 29th DVOA against the run. This is where it's an interesting week. We could talk a little bit about this, but we're at a point now where we're starting to get real information in terms of how good a team is. After 1 week, we don't know because they've only played one team. We don't know how good that team is. And after 2 weeks, we start to put a little bit more together. But after a month, we have a little more information about how legitimate a team's defense and offense and all the components therein are rating against the larger field. And so this is where I start to look at those defense against position ratings, and you still take them with, you have to look at them, but this Carolina defense is fourth against the against the pass, and 29th against the rush. And so I think that makes Fournette, who's largely the focal point of that offense, it makes him an interesting play at his price point, which is still fairly cheap for a guy who rushed for 200 yards last week.
Point chasing.
And nice. And John brings up a good.
Before last week, it was playing a bad player. This week, it's point chasing. Okay.
Yeah. So John makes a good point. I release my normalized strength of schedule after 4 weeks because, like he's saying, I don't feel like I got enough data until I've got 4 weeks of data. And I'm looking at the stats here. Carolina has the fewest passing yards allowed per game at only 182 yards per game. Ryan, tell me what you think about running backs. I saw you doing a lot of yesing, head nodding to some of John's picks there. Who else you got?
Yeah, I mean, with the Fournette thing, again, they're a reverse funnel defense, right? So Carolina is, so they allow a lot to the run, not the pass. And so the worry is Jacksonville gets behind, but the guy plays every snap, so he's still going to be on the field. So we'll not beat that to death because we know where we all stand there. Aside from McCaffrey at the top, I like Ezekiel Elliott this week. So similar to Carolina, Green Bay is kind of the same way. They're very good against the pass. They're not very good against the run. The only concern from keeping Zeke from cash is A, you're playing McCaffrey before him, and B, his pass game involvement hasn't been too significant this year. But again, they're going to feed him, and Green Bay does allow 43% of their total yards via the run, which is the second highest percentage in the league. So they're a team that can allow it that way. Another guy I like for some salary relief is David Montgomery over in London. So he is taking over the Bears' backfield, and he's a guy who is in a game where he is favored, and he's going to get a lot of work against an Oakland team that it seems like teams can do whatever they kind of want against him. So I guess Devin's taking his salary relief at quarterback this week, not at running back, but Montgomery's somebody that I'm looking at if I want some relief at the running back position. Other than that, from a GPP perspective, I like David Johnson. I think David Johnson might play some slot snaps this week with all the injuries to the Arizona wide receiver core that you're going to talk about here in a couple minutes, Austin. So you've got a guy who can run routes and he'll contribute as a pass catcher and a runner for Arizona. Looking down my list, another guy I like actually kind of in that same game, and it's GPP only, of course, is Joe Mixon. So you have a 47.5 point over under. He's favored. He's at home. If not now, when is what it says here in my notes for Joe Mixon. So he's an athletic player. He's talented. He's in a great game situation. And Steve has him at 12.9%. So he's somebody that might be overlooked.
Why is he GPP only?
Because I don't know how safe he is to play in cash at this point. There's a good chance, even though all the good things I'm going to say about this game, there's a good chance that neither team does anything and it just kind of craps out entirely.
It could be a messy but high-scoring game. It could be interesting.
It could be. So you like him in cash then, I take it, right?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that without John Ross, who's interesting, and don't want to get into wide receivers too much, but John Ross is being replaced by Auden Tate, who ran a 4.7 40-yard dash. It might be the biggest differential in NFL history, going from a 4.22 to a 4.70. I think that it's going to be a game in which they try to run the ball. It's to your point, Joe Mixon hasn't been good this year, and he hasn't been bad. I mean, he's gone for 60 yards in 2 straight games, but he's also faced some good defenses. He's faced the Bills. He's faced the 49ers, who 49ers may have one of the most underrated defenses of the year. And then the Seahawks have a pretty good run defense as well. So it's a game in which, to your point, everything lines up that it should be a bit of a breakout game for him. And he's catching passes. He's caught 11 passes over the first 4 games. So I think the floor is there for Mixon this week. In GPPs, I'm looking at Carlos Hyde. So Hyde is still getting a majority of the carries, even though Duke Johnson is there. And outside of Grady Jarrett, why are you laughing?
I'm laughing at Ryan.
So the Falcons have allowed 3 running backs to go over 70 yards this year in Marlon Mack, Derrick Henry, and Dalvin Cook. and they're having some bit of some issues. Keanu Neal tore his Achilles and will be out for the year. He's their best run-stopping safety, so it's a bit of you get some savings. He's 4,300 on DraftKings, and I think very few people are actually going to look at him. So 14 carries, somewhere in there. I think he gets to 60 yards and probably finds the end zone.
Running backs catch passes against Atlanta.
He doesn't catch passes. Oakland you recommended David Montgomery. Like, come on.
I think David Montgomery is going to be a somewhat popular pick.
Your Joe Mixon argument was the exact same as the Deshaun Watson argument. For the record.
Can we make a bet, Hyde versus Montgomery?
In terms of what? Ownership or output?
No, output.
Output.
Well, I think what I'm hearing from you though is you're a FanDuel guy, and I think Ryan's probably more of a DraftKings guy.
I'll do it on DraftKings. That's fine.
Well, then you guys should bet to shave your heads. That's what I'm going
for. It's not going to grow back if Ryan shaves his head. So.
Thank you. What I have left still looks good enough. I can't.
You don't want to mess with that.
We'll figure something out, but.
All right, David Montgomery versus Carlos Hyde, full PPR scoring, DraftKings scoring. We'll figure something out.
Point per dollar.
Sounds good. Point per dollar. Oh, we're doing point per dollar now?
What? Oh.
Okay. All right.
We'll do just total output. I'm that confident. Even though you're saving 900, Hyde's going to outperform it for sure.
Fair enough.
In the comments, #Hyde, #Montgomery.
I like it. Who you think's going to get the most points DraftKings scoring? There's a few guys we haven't mentioned who I think are going to be somewhat popular picks. John, do you have anything to add about guys like Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, maybe Aaron Jones with Jamal Williams out? Any of those guys tickle your fancy?
Yeah, we'll talk. Cook I have on my cash game list, but the truth is I probably won't play him because for $300 more I can have CMC, right?
Right.
And so I think that's the issue. It'll be interesting. Right now, Buzzard has Cook being right beneath Christian McCaffrey and Zeke Elliott in terms of ownership. I'll be interested to see whether that comes true. If Cook is 23% owned this weekend, and then we record this on Thursday night, so always have to qualify that. But if he's 23% owned this weekend, I might be willing to do a full fade of him because I really like the passing game this week. And if Cook has just an average game, that puts me up on those 23%, basically a quarter of the lineups on DraftKings. So, monitor Buzzard. He updates and he calibrates and so forth throughout the rest of the week. So monitor that. But Cook, for cash, I don't have a problem with it. I don't think you should have to do it because of McCaffrey. But for GPPs, I think he's probably going to be a fade for me. I'll mention two other guys, one of whom has been mentioned. I do like Zeke for many of the reasons that Ryan mentioned, although I don't think he's cash game viable. I think he's more of a GPP play this week. And I don't think I heard anybody mention Derrick Henry against Buffalo. Buffalo has been excellent against the pass, but they haven't done a whole lot against the rush this year. Henry's a guy that's we've seen him break out a big play. He's big, he's powerful, he's fast, and I like what I'm seeing in terms of scrolling down the list here. He's 7% on Buzzard's list for ownership this week. I think he's a sharp play, especially if he stays below double digits.
What are we doing with Melvin Gordon?
Oh yeah, we need to talk about him. Yeah.
Nothing.
It's a good matchup, right?
Denver's horrible against them.
Yeah.
I wish he were back 1 week later because it'd be Eckler week part 4.
What does Steve have him?
I've got it
3% on DraftKings, 3% on DraftKings, and 2% on FanDuel.
If we get some news that he's going to be 80% of the snap, like 80% of the touches.
Right.
But will he be though? Do we believe that? He's Buzzard's got Eckler at 11% for what it's worth. It's because it's early in the week, and I think he's just kind of playing his model. But the thing is, we don't know how they're going to split snaps and targets and so forth. Eckler's played so well. I got to think he gets what he does he get one touch for every two of Gordon?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
And that's scary to me. I don't know that it's worth, the risk at that point. Although at 3%, if Gordon goes off at 3%, I'll probably be overweight simply because they're a 7-point home favorite against a team that you guys have already referenced as being a poor running defense.
I mean, it's the cheapest he'll be all year. So
Yeah.
especially on FanDuel where he's only 6,800. And I mean, DraftKings, it's harder because he's 7,000. So he's the 6th highest running back, but on FanDuel, he's like the 12th highest running back. I mean, he's in the Aaron Jones, Derrick Henry, Phillip Lindsay, Jordan Howard price range. That seems pretty enticing that all it takes for Gordon is 1 or 2 runs.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Definitely GPP worthy. And you just got too many good cash game options, though, to really look at anything there for cash. But it's definitely a GPP play. All right, please subscribe, hit the bell, and give us a thumbs up. Thanks for watching. Let's go to wide receivers. Who wants to go first here? I got a ton of injuries. I'm just going to let you guys kind of pick them off as you mention your plays, and then I'll mention some other ones as, if we don't mention them in the course of things. Ryan, let's talk about receivers. Who do you like?
So I started with Deshaun Watson, so I may as well start here with DeAndre Hopkins. I think he's due to blow up, and this could be the very week that he does. They're a team that has faced some really tough cornerback matchups so far this year, and so this could be a week where that reverses course and Hopkins finally shows out like the DeAndre Hopkins we know him to be. So going down further than that, though, I think we should really, especially on DraftKings, just start with Michael Thomas. I mean, 6,600, and the guy is projected by Dodds right now to be the highest scoring receiver on the week, and he's 6,600. I mean, that's basically a free space in cash games, 20% discount, whatever you want to call it, for Michael Thomas. Another one I like, who is ironically only 100 less than Michael Thomas and shouldn't be based on pedigree, is Tyler Boyd. So we talked about the Cincy injuries. We talked about Auden Tate and how Devin doesn't like him. And Auden Tate at first I wanted to like because he's only 3,500, but he's got bad chalk written all over him this week, I think. And so Tyler Boyd is somebody out of the slot who's going to get a number of targets in an up-tempo game. So he'll get more targets based on the injury. He'll get more targets based on the game. So I think he's got a very safe floor. And then just across the way in the same game, Larry Fitzgerald is about 500 cheaper than Boyd. And Fitzgerald will see increased targets too because of injuries to Christian Kirk and Damiere Byrd in Arizona. They have a number of rookies and Pharaoh Cooper, who they just re-signed after he was there in the preseason, who was allegedly going to start in the slot this week. And so Fitzgerald is going to be the guy Kyler Murray looks to early and often, as he already has been throughout the year. And I'm another one, or if I can sneak 2 more in, I guess, real quick. Marquise Brown is just due to explode, and I'm just going to keep talking about him until he does. If you follow any fantasy football Twitter or podcasts at all, he's 3rd in the league in air yards, and that is tends to see things, tends to predict things to come in the future. One last one, projected at 3%, squeaky wheel narrative is Stephon Diggs at the Giants. They've given up deep plays all year. Both Vikings wide receivers have been very critical this week of coaching and quarterbacking there in Minnesota, and the matchup is great. So it seems like a get-right week for that passing game. Steph Diggs is cheaper and projected to be on fewer rosters than Adam Thielen.
Nice. Devin, let's talk about – go to John. Let's go to John for wide receivers. What do you think?
Agree with Michael Thomas as the top cash game play, 6,600 on DraftKings, 12-1 over at Fantasy Draft.
Let me interrupt for a second. With Traquan Smith potentially coming back, does that help, hurt, or indifferent on that pick?
Indifferent.
I think it might actually help. I mean, because Ted Ginn, we know how I feel about Ted Ginn. So that's all he does.
Ginn keeps the safeties deeper, and Traquan's a better. It probably washes.
Yeah. Okay. Just wanted to check. Go for it, John.
It's not worth debating.
Yeah. Go for it, John.
Fair enough. And then Keenan Allen will continue to be a cash game play probably throughout the year. He's 7,300, 13-7 at Fantasy Draft. I think he's in play. I'll save Devin the problem of asking the following question. What does Emmanuel Sanders have to do to have his price raised? Was that good? Did I do a good job?
I should have went first.
That was a good impression. I like it.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said it, though, John, because the one week Devin said it was his only stinker, and I agreed with Devin full bore on that.
I said it last week, too.
Oh, did you? Perfect. Good. Sorry.
Well, I mean, he should be fine. 5,100. He's cheap enough. He continues to get targeted by Flacco. No issues there. And then I'm going to look over my GPP list. Nuke Hopkins is on my GPP list. Marquise Brown is on my GPP list. So, Ryan, I agree with both of those guys. I already mentioned another player, Allen Robinson, earlier. But the player I think is going to be a difference maker this week, and maybe we should spend a little bit of time on him because I think that it sounded like Devin had a strong opinion on him earlier. I projected it on our internal football guys kind of chat room or whatever we want to call it. I said Auden Tate would be 20% or more, and that was when we were kind of talking about it. It looks like Buzzard in his first projections has him at he's basically tied with Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas is 20.6, and Auden Tate's 20.5. I'll tell you, I was pretty impressed with what I saw from Tate last week. He's a big receiver. I think they get inside the red zone. He's the type of guy that's just going to go up and pluck it and score a touchdown. I won't go so far as to say he's worth being 21% owned in tournaments. That said, he is 3,500, and that's where I think a lot of the attraction is going to come, especially when we think about what we were talking about 6 to 7 minutes ago when we were referencing Christian McCaffrey at 8,700. Yeah. And just before that, we love Lamar Jackson, but we weren't sure we could afford him. Well, you can afford him if you go with Tate. And so I think he's going to be the kind of the inflection point this week in both cash games and GPPs. And so I think, it's probably worth discussing him in a little bit of detail tonight, just to give the listeners and viewers where we stand with regards to both cash games as well as GPP.
Ryan, you waved your hands emphatically about this.
Well, just for the record, I see Steve has him DraftKings at 14.9. So, still high, but a little less than 20. So I don't know if that changes your opinion, John. I think those are from like a couple hours ago. So
I've got DraftKings at 6:49 p.m. That's 20.5%.
Okay. I pulled mine in at probably 5:49 p.m. So good.
Yeah, I think he updated it and bumped it because I think this is the crux of what you're deciding, right? We've recommended a lot of high-priced players. Where are you finding salary relief? Devin, how do you feel about this? Is this where you're going for salary relief?
It's two other $3,500 receivers, actually.
Interesting. Do tell.
So the first is Keyshawn Johnson, filling in for Christian Kirk. I think he's a deep play threat that should see a lot of action this week. I don't mind Tate, but at that price point, like, come on, I can't. No, not ownership. Sorry, at 21% ownership, I think it's too high.
What about cash games, though? Let's talk about cash game because I think this is where we're going to see Tate could be 50% owned in cash games.
Yeah, if he's 50% owned, I don't know if I want to stand on the ledge. Like,
well, we've got to take a stand. If you feel that he's viable in cash games and should be played in cash games, sorry, Austin, I'm taking your role here.
That's fine.
How about one of these? So take a stand because people are going to be looking at it.
I don't have a yellow one.
When Devin is quiet, that means he's showing the yellow one.
So by the absence of the red one, does that mean that you think he's GPP cash game? He should be in your cash games.
He's viable. He's not a lock.
Okay, but you would rather play Keyshawn Johnson?
Not in cash. No.
Okay.
Not in cash.
Okay.
I'd rather play two $3,500 receivers in GPPs. I'd rather play Keyshawn Johnson, and I'd rather play Javon Wims with Taylor Gabriel being out. So Chase Daniel loves to throw to the slot receiver and Tariq Cohen. 47 targets between Cohen and Gabriel and Wims in his 4 starts. So there's a big opportunity for Wims. We saw it this past week where he was on the field for 94% of the plays. Taylor Gabriel did not travel to London this week. I think that Javon Wims is at the same price. He has 15-point upside, 20-point upside if he can find the end zone. So that's a guy I'm looking at it in GPPs as well. My favorite GPP play this week is Will Fuller. So we've mentioned DeAndre Hopkins. Will Fuller is actually seeing significant targets over the last couple of weeks. So and we all know about Fuller. We all know about his speed. He hasn't scored a touchdown this year, but he has 20 targets over the last 3 weeks, and at that price at 4,500 on DraftKings, he can very easily turn those 20 targets into some success. And at the top, I don't love Michael Thomas, but I agree he's too cheap on DraftKings. He hasn't been great this year. I'm not playing him on FanDuel at 7,700. I'd rather play Keenan Allen at 75 in cash. But that's kind of where I'm looking at FanDuel. I'm also playing Tyler Boyd in cash at 6,700. And I don't know. I kind of like Julian Edelman at 63 on DraftKings with the full PPR going up against Washington, who struggled against slot receivers. So that's kind of where I'm going in cash.
There's a couple guys that we haven't talked about. Devontae Adams doesn't look like he's going to play for Green Bay this week. Is there another Green Bay receiver you have your eye on for GPPs?
I'm lukewarm about this. I've looked at it. I mean, if there's a receiver I like on that team, it's Marquez Valdez-Scantling. I think he's the most talented of those secondary receivers. But Dallas is a pretty darn good defense, and I don't know. I expect them to bounce back after a slow game on Sunday night against the Saints. I don't love any of the players in that game outside of maybe the running back for the Packers, as we talked about earlier.
The answer is Jimmy Graham.
That's the one. I was just going to say that's the slight Adams bump is Jimmy Graham.
Gotcha.
My problem is MVS is going to probably – John, is he going to see Byron Jones?
I think he is going to see Byron Jones.
Geronimo Allison out of the slot, maybe?
Yeah, that too.
Allison's going to see Anthony Brown out of the slot. Scantling he'll see a combination of Byron Jones and Chidobe.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know. I don't see that game. I actually think these are two really good defenses, despite what we saw last week with Green Bay. I don't know what happened with the Eagles and how they just they exploited them. But before that, Green Bay looked like they had a decent defense. So I don't know. I don't think that – I don't need to go towards those Green Bay receivers this week to get an edge.
Yeah.
Real quick before we move on back to Auden Tate, just before everybody thinks we're only recommending him because of the injury. John Ross was hurt in the second half of last week's game. Tate has played 89 and 91% of the Bengals snaps in the last two games. He's been a part of the offense. Right. He's averaging 8 targets in those 2 games. He has 10 catches for 138 yards. He has 3 red zone targets, which is second on the team to Tyler Eifert. So he's part of the offense already. So it's not like we're just pulling a guy off the bench. Now, what Devin said remains true. He's not fast. He's not the most dynamic athlete in the world, but he's been out there.
Yeah. John, what do you want to say about that?
I'm fine with what you just said. I agree with everything you said, but I wanted to bring up, and there's no organic place to bring it up, the Arizona Cardinals offense. Week 1, we had the air attack. We saw 27 points against the Lions. That was in fairness, that was in 5 quarters of football. Week 2, they played a Baltimore defense. They scored 17 points. They ran a lot of plays, but they only scored 17 points. And Baltimore gave up like 64 points or something to Cleveland Browns last week. And then they went to they were at home against Carolina. They scored 20 points there. And then they were at home last week against Seattle, who's a defense I'm kind of on the fence on right now. This week, they're going on the road to Cincinnati, who's not a good defense. What I'm getting at here, I guess, is this a repeat of Chip Kelly circa 2015, where the league is starting to see some film and being able to put some moves on this offense and shut them down? I'm a little bit worried. And the reason I bring it up is because I heard somebody say they like Kyler Murray earlier. I heard somebody else say they like David Johnson. And I'm also pretty sure I heard a Larry Fitzgerald recommendation so far.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of, hey, we like this team. And I'm actually on the fence. I'm not so sure. I just wanted to throw it out for a discussion point. Is this a team that is legit? I mean, you heard me touting them in week 2 about how many plays they were running. I just wonder whether or not film is finally catching up with them and whether or not this is a team we can count on moving forward.
Are they legit? No. But The problem
Bengals.
the problem on the team is the offensive line. So they have one of, if not the worst offensive lines in football. They're outside of their center, they're pretty bad. So I mean, if you look at the Seahawks, Panthers, Ravens, what do they all have? They have a pass rush. Cincinnati has no pass rush. So I like it just because if Murray has time, I mean, he still threw for 350 against the Ravens. I don't like the offense, but it's more of a offensive line thing for me than anything. If Murray has time, he still can scramble and do that type of thing. I don't know.
And for me this week, I was the one that said Johnson and Fitzgerald, and I'm not doing it in the same lineup necessarily, but it's a volume thing due to injuries and just they're going to run plays, they're going to throw they're going to get production, and those guys, especially in PPR, those guys are going to catch passes and get points, even if the team scores 23 points instead of 33 points. Those guys can still produce at their prices.
Yeah, Matt Batanti has them as 32nd on the offensive line with a D grade across the board, which they're the only team without some sort of C grade.
And to be clear, I don't hate the plays. I just wanted to maybe talk about that because it's something I'm wondering as part of my process. Is this a team that will continue to get 70 plays a week? Because I think right now, if you look over the past 3 weeks in terms of plays per game, they're in the bottom half of the league. So even that is starting to trend towards the bottom. And if we take away that overtime tie in week 1, they're just a quote average team in terms of plays. And that's been where we've been getting the value from them. And if they continue just to run average amount of plays, as you point out, Devin, they don't have a great offensive line. They're not going to extend drives and so on and so forth. And it's just a talking point. I guess, as more games are played, we'll find out.
Yeah. For me, it's just that Bengals have only had 5 sacks on the year, which is pathetic. So
that's pretty awful. Let's talk about tight ends. Devin, let's go to you first on tight ends. Who do you like?
What does Darren Waller have to do to raise his price?
Score a touchdown. The guy's so overdue for a touchdown.
I mean, at 5,000 I guess I could say the same thing about Austin Hooper. It's those two guys for me are the clear cash game plays. Everyone's going to be afraid of the Bears defense. Their run defense is absolutely legit. I'm not buying their pass defense yet. They allowed 332 yards to Case Keenum. They allowed 292 yards to Joe Flacco. Yes, they look good in week 1 against Aaron Rodgers, but last week they gave up 233 to Kirk Cousins, and we all know everything about the Vikings defense or Vikings offense and that they don't really want to throw the ball. The way to beat this Bears defense is to throw it. And with Tyrell Williams, I don't know if he's going to play. I know he's dealing with an injury. If he doesn't go, Waller might see 12, 14 targets realistically. It's not out of the realm of possibility because who are their other receivers? They have Hunter Renfrow and they have J.J. Nelson. Neither one of those guys are great. We saw in a tough matchup against the Vikings 2 weeks ago in that Derek Carr just locked in on Waller and threw the ball to him. He had 13 catches for 134 yards. I think it's another one of those games where he's just going to get rid of the ball as fast as he can, not try to push the ball downfield, and just pepper Darren Waller.
Yeah, and Tyrell Williams did not practice on Thursday, so he's very much iffy for this game. John,
I'll let someone else talk about Hooper because he's just as good of a play.
Yeah, John, who do you like? Hooper, Waller, someone else?
Those guys are at the top of my list. I think that's the direction I'll be going on DraftKings this week. And I may go a little bit more towards Hooper at a 10% discount. He's 4,500. The guy, listen to these stat lines. 4 weeks now, 9, 77, and 0. That's 17 points. He had a clunker against Philadelphia. He had 8 points. 2 touchdowns, 6 catches, 66 yards against Indianapolis. And last week, he had 9 catches for 130 yards, and he's 4,500. That's the way to go against Houston. Houston, I think we heard already, they've got a decent defense. They've allowed the third least points to the tight end position, including shutting down Greg Olsen, if that matters to you. But I think we're looking at a different offense here in terms of how they use the tight ends. The quality of quarterback play comes into play, game script, and so on and so forth. That's the direction I'm going. If you somehow have extra money, and I don't know this week how you're going to in cash games, but Zach Ertz against the Jets is certainly a fine cash game play at 6,000. I think he's the best receiver on that team, and he's offered at a discount from at least one or two of those primary wide receivers. That's the direction I'd be going. In terms of GPPs, I like quite a few guys at GPP. I won't talk about them all, but I'll say at the top of the list, Tyler Eifert. Somebody mentioned Andy Dalton earlier with the injury to Ross, and we're talking about a guy like Auden Tate being at 21% owned. I'm going to pull up this ownership percentage on Buzzard he is the top. He's the top guy at 16%. So maybe that's I'm not being as sneaky as I thought I was, but at 3,300 on DraftKings, 6,400 at Fantasy Draft, going against Arizona, who has bled. They've absolutely bled fantasy production to this position. They're giving up 28 fantasy points per game to the tight end position. The next lower one, Tampa Bay Bucks at 19.6. So it's about a 50% difference. And last week they gave up a touchdown to Disley. The week prior, 2 touchdowns to Olsen. The week prior to that, 2 touchdowns to the Baltimore Ravens tight ends. And the week prior to that, they let TJ Hawkinson go wild in his NFL debut. Eifert's looked good, and we know he has the talent. It's always been a matter of health for him. So far, he's held it together, and I think he's probably my prime GPP play of the week at this position.
And bringing up Hooper, you have to point out that his price is way different on FanDuel than it is on DraftKings. He's a significant discount on DraftKings, but he's the highest price guy on FanDuel. So you're probably not playing him over there, but on DraftKings, an excellent pick. Who's not talked about tight ends yet? Ryan, do that.
Yeah, another thing on Eifert is that he had multiple end zone targets that just obviously didn't come to fruition last week, but they are looking for him down there. We alluded to it earlier, but Jimmy Graham gets the no Devontae Adams bump, multiple end zone targets last week after Adams left that game. Steve had him at 3.7. He has him now at 4.5, so much lower than the other guys we talked about. And also just super cheap, only 2,800 DraftKings, Noah Fant for Denver. He only has 4 targets as a high this year, but he has played at least 63% of the snaps in every game and played 73 last week. And he's an athletic guy, so that's what we're looking for. At least that's what I'm looking for with tight ends. I know Austin Hooper's producing, but as many times as I've rostered him in past years and he's been like a catch and fall guy, it's just wild to me that he's finally, showing out. So good for him. But Noah Fant is a guy we know can catch the ball and run and make plays. So
Fant is way too cheap on FanDuel at 4,900.
Yeah,
he's almost the minimum.
Cheap there as well. So he's somebody worth looking at if you're looking for savings down at the tight end position. So that's all I had.
Nice. Any other tight end plays before we go to defenses? Let's do defenses. John, tell me, who you playing at defense? No one is the Dolphins. You can't play the Dolphins this week. Can't play against the Dolphins. So
$1,800 Washington. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh my gosh. Oh wow. No, that's where your savings is coming from. We got it here. Cash games. No, definitely not. John, who are you playing?
In all honesty, I didn't even research defenses for the show. I can tell you on the Vegas value chart, my 3-star defense is the New England Patriots against Washington, Dwayne Haskins. And looking at Buzzard's projections for ownership, I think it's the first time all year I've seen them. They're just below it, but they're below double digits. So I'd be happy to take them at that. But I suspect they'll creep up into the 16 to 17% range.
But what if it's Colt McCoy starting? Who knows who their starting quarterback is this week?
I don't know who it is.
Yeah, Colt McCoy helps him, I think.
I don't think New England's in play if McCoy plays. He's just too much of a game manager.
What I've seen this year so far, just in general, is a lot of there's too much chalk at the team defense position for GPPs. Yeah. And I mean, there's way too much. And it's hit for what it's worth. And I think that's a trend that will not continue.
Right.
And so the crowds are going to continue to do it. But I think if you're a savvy GPP player, you recognize that the volatility of the position is associated with scoring in the form of touchdowns, defensive touchdowns. And so you should be going underweight on these chalky defenses as they become apparent as we enter the weekend. Right now, Buzzard has the Panthers going up against the Jacksonville Jags and Minshew. I don't know. Just go underweight on the chalk and get yourself some exposure to some of the others. And I think that's the way. That's my recommendation to the folks listening and watching. Stay away from the chalk in GPPs. In cash games, I think that's the Patriots.
Ryan, do you agree?
Yeah, I do, especially with those. But the Patriots are expensive, so there's another couple of cash game choices for savings. Tennessee is home and hosts either the turnover-prone Josh Allen or the flat-out terrible Matt Barkley if Allen can't play after taking the dirty hit last week. The Chargers host Denver and Joe Flacco. And then those are the cash ones. And then two just kind of wild off the wall because we don't want to play chalk GPP defenses is the Steelers are at home and they're super cheap. They're 2,100 on DraftKings. They have 13 sacks in the last 3 weeks. They forced at least 2 turnovers in each of their last 3 games. So they're a defense that is trending in the right direction, and they tend to do some wild things at home. So then the other one I like is Jacksonville. So Deshaun Watson still takes plenty of sacks. And do we remember when the Jacksonville defense was really good? It wasn't that long ago, right? So they're another cheap team. I know they're on the road, so it's not ideal. I said Deshaun Watson. I'm sorry. That's a bad note. They're playing Carolina.
Yeah.
However, they are facing Kyle Allen, so that could work out in their favor as well. But again, the point stands. Jacksonville, not far off from being a pretty ferocious defense, so they're another one that not many people will be on.
Devin, what do you think?
Play New England
in cash and GPP.
Cash, yes. I'm just forcing them in. GPP.
I don't think you can play him in GPP. I think John's points about it are absolutely right.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the thing. If you're playing one GPP lineup, you could play him. It's fine.
No,
you could, but I just don't think it's the right call.
It's been the right call all year.
That's why it's going to change. No, I don't.
But I'll say this: if Haskins is playing, I'll play them everywhere. If it's Case Keenum, I'll play them in cash, but I won't play them in GPP. And that's kind of how I'm taking that approach.
That's fair. I could see that.
I mean, Haskins threw 3 interceptions and a half and just looked lost. And if Jay Gruden puts him out there against this elite New England defense, he's a moron.
Yeah.
Like, it'll be a very long day for Dwayne Haskins. And I love Dwayne Haskins, Ohio State guy, but he's not ready.
Yeah. I think it's going to be Colt McCoy, but who the heck knows? Let's move on to stacks. We've mentioned a few stacks. We've teased a few. Let's talk about some more. Devin, let's go back to you. You got a couple stacks?
Sure. So Matt Ryan and Mohamed Sanu, actually.
I thought we were going to have the very first show of the Power Grid where Devin mentioned Julio Jones before Ryan did, and it did not happen.
So Sanu is actually playing pretty well over the last couple of weeks.
I was going to mention Sanu, ironically enough, but go ahead.
15 catches, 166 yards over his last 2 games. Hasn't found the end zone, but he's really replacing what Calvin Ridley is kind of disappearing. At 4,200 on DraftKings, Sanu is a cash viable receiver that I didn't actually mention, but a guy that you should be looking at for sure.
Ryan, who would you like to bring up? Yeah, and I liked Sanu as part of a game stack just because I think Watson Hopkins will be heavily rostered, and Sanu can differentiate that.
You forgot Fuller.
If you're going that direction. Yeah, Fuller can be in there. I mean, there's so many options in that game that's the one you can just focus on and kind of riff off of every possible combination there if you're a multi-lineup guy. So the other one I mentioned, I'm just, this is Devin's Josh Allen, John Brown is Lamar Jackson, Marquise Brown. Just keep doing it. And we didn't talk about the Steeler passing game because it's not worth talking about, but Baltimore's defensive secondary I'll continue to mention is riddled with injuries. They are performing like they are. I don't think Jimmy Smith will come back this week. Juju Smith-Schuster is still going to see his volume. Deontay Johnson has been a breath of fresh air, scoring touchdowns, scored a touchdown last week, made some plays in his debut. And then one we didn't mention, we talked about how New England's going to score all these points. Devin thinks it'll be their defense returning touchdowns, but how about Tom Brady and Julian Edelman against the Washington team?
You didn't listen to me, did you?
That just stinks.
Did you not hear me say the words Julian Edelman during the receiver section?
No, didn't. I tend to not listen to you.
Yeah.
So apologies. Brady Edelman was another one I had written down that I didn't hear. Sorry, but one that I liked. So good call, Devin. Good call, buddy.
It's really weird that Devin and Ryan are making the same picks this week. I think Ryan went away last week and got replaced by a cyborg.
But we made a bet though too, so we're still we're still holding up our disagreements.
That's good. John, who you stacking?
And surprisingly, I did hear the Edelman call from Devin, so I can confirm. Looking through my list, I think a lot of what I have here is chalky, which is disappointing. I like to give out something that's not so chalky. I think you can go with I guess the one that I have that's the least popular is Chase Daniel to A-Rob. I think that one's a decent one. I think you can go in line with what these guys are saying. If you're going to game stack this week, that Houston game looks like the game to stack with Atlanta. You can go Matt Ryan to Hooper and run it back with DeAndre Hopkins, or if you're Devin, you run it back with Will Fuller. I think you can also go the opposite way. You could go Deshaun Watson with either of those receivers, and then run it back with probably. I don't know. I'm not keen on the Sanu call, by the way. I'm going to go against you guys both on that. I just don't see it. But you could go back with Julio or Hooper on that end. And Teddy Bridgewater to Michael Thomas, that's a super cheap option. I can see those guys connecting for a pair of touchdowns, and if they did, that would more than pay off both of the respective salaries. Bridgewater's pretty low owned, I think 3% this week in terms of projections. Obviously, Thomas being a favorite, but I think you could do that and be okay with it. So I think I'll stop there.
Right on. Fellas, it's time for parting thoughts, words of wisdom to leave our viewers with for week 5. Devin, what are your parting thoughts this week?
I actually have one this week. So I forgot to mention Mike Evans. Mike Evans and Marshawn Lattimore have a long history of shenanigans. And so it's a little bit of a motivating factor for Evans. And last year he had 245 yards and a touchdown against Lattimore. So he's a guy that you should be considering. It seems like every other week him and Godwin go, one of those two goes off. So I think it's Evans this week.
Nice. Ryan, parting thoughts.
Yeah, so one guy that we mentioned but went past pretty quickly because he's not super popular this week. Anytime you could get Alvin Kamara at 10% or less, which is what Steve is projecting, it seems to be a good spot. I mean, the guy's a dynamic player, as we all know, but he's a great price leverage play off of Dalvin Cook. He's a great game leverage play off of Michael Thomas. And so that's why I think the roster, percentage projection is so low. And that's when you really want to take is the good players in the non-ideal spots. Outside of that, please keep coming back to the site. Check out the DFS landing page. We have so much good stuff on there. One article I've been reading, and it's really going to hurt the disagreement brand here, but Devin's cash game article that he updates every Sunday is actually, I shouldn't even say actually, it's quite good. One thing I really like about it is that he hits on probably, 3 to 4 just situations that you want to make sure you're on. Teams that are projected to score a lot, enhanced volume type of situations on certain teams. It's just kind of a check your boxes sort of thing that I like to do when I'm making a cash game lineup, and I want to make sure I get at least 2 of those 3, if not all 3. So that's something that everybody should check out if they haven't yet. And
the lineup that I won the contest with was in that article. I give away my cash game lineup that I play every Sunday. So.
Who do you have ghostwrite that, Devin?
That That's a secret.
Well, the grammar and punctuation is terrible, so I think he does it himself.
Nice. Well played.
I can edit for a small fee, by the way.
No, they come for the lineup. They don't actually read the article.
Good point.
John, parting thoughts.
I can't beat that. You know what? As I'm looking at this, Tampa Bay last week really surprised me with their offense against a Rams defense that I thought was fairly legit, putting up almost 50 points. I talked about game stacking earlier with this Houston-Atlanta game. I think you could look at this Tampa Bay-New Orleans game this week and legitimately stack it up. You already heard you guys, what was Devin talking about Mike Evans?
Yeah.
Was it? Yeah, okay. So Devin talking about Mike Evans, Teddy Bridgewater, Ryan talked about Kamara. So you could legitimately do something like Bridgewater, Kamara, Mike Thomas, and then run it back with Mike Evans on the other side. And don't sleep on Jared Cook in that game. Tampa Bay, 31st in the league against tight ends this season. They've allowed a series of Gerald Everett, Evan Ingram, Greg Olsen, George Kittle, all to have big games. And Cook is, he's still involved. He's still getting plenty of snaps. I look for him to break out. So I think there's a lot of ways to go with that game. And my piece of parting advice tonight is to don't sleep on that game when you're building out your GPP rosters, especially in large field tournaments. There's a lot of correlation to be had there. So stack it up.
Nice. Be sure to check out all of our content over at footballguys.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Help us get to 10,000 subscribers, and we'll run a special contest. We'll be back next Friday morning with our Week 6 episode. On behalf of John Lee, Devin Knotts, and Ryan Hester, I'm Austin Lee saying thank you for watching, and thanks for being a football guy. To check out our content at footballguys.com, click the button on Devin's face. To subscribe to our YouTube channel, be sure to click on the button on John's face. And if you'd like to see our latest video, click on the giant video in front of Ryan's face. Click any of those now. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.